pleasure to meet you all who are online. Thank you for joining in on my presentation of if you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask with what seat, just get on. It's a quote by someone who has wise words. Super excited to talk to you about digital transformation in the digital building lifecycle framework and talk a little bit about how I ended up in this career and why I chose it as my career track. So,
Salla, just a quick note. Sorry to interrupt. You have the present. If you could change your view on your slides because we're seeing all of them. If you could change the view perspective.
Okay. Is that better now?
There, perfect. Thank you.
Good. So let's hop on board and please do ask your questions as we are going, and this can be fairly informal, and I'll try to bake it into a story about my career, meeting what I'm actually doing with my partners and vendors at Microsoft currently, and to kind of catch up on how did I end up here. This is the background is from Where's Waldo? So it kind of illustrates how my career has been, that I did my master's degree in architecture in Finland from Tampere University of Technology. And as I was studying to become a designer, to design buildings and design cities, I was also on the track to do my master's in construction management and structural engineering. But when I graduated, I decided it doesn't make sense to do dual masters in basically the same industry. So I used the credits that I did for the structural engineering, construction management towards PhD studies. Overall, what has been the crimson thread is that I've always had the curiosity of what if we did things differently, and what if I tested things out in this scope of work. I started my career off as an academic researcher. So the point of view and the horizon that I had was 10 years, 20 years ahead of where we currently were, and really thinking about what does it mean for people as decision makers and people as stakeholders, that if we change the processes and drive different business outcomes. Because it's always when thinking about businesses, it's always about profitable growth or improving your products or services. And with that horizon, as an academic researcher, I got the glimpses of what is it that the industry, the AECO industry actually needs, and what does it mean globally. I was working on projects with Finnish construction industry stakeholders, but also with European Union cities and governments and companies, and also with some American and Asian companies. So it was a lot of fun to see what are the mega trends globally that would be then impacting our industry locally. And then I ended up having a career track where I was an academic researcher, but then fortunately to 2008 market crash pushed me for a design and engineering career track for a few years. And that was a pivot point where I discovered that in order for me to be a disruptor and a pioneer in this beloved industry of ours, AECO, I need to see what are the issues and the problems in everyday operations of an architect or an engineer or a general contractor or a subcontractor, etc. And what I discovered is that we are very good at explaining to ourselves that things are much better than they actually are. And when I was conducting academic research and doing a lot of interviews, I was interacting with a lot of different stakeholders and really deep diving into what they see as issues in their scope of work, meaning that the project might get delayed or there are some hiccups, or what are the problems that are completely putting projects on hold and inhibiting things from moving forward. So going into a design and engineering world for a few years, I saw that what are the digital transformation needs tangibly when you are designing new buildings or designing retrofits and renovations for existing buildings, and what does it actually mean for the extended project team, because there are so many different stakeholders working on the same project but from a completely different point of view. And then once the world economy started picking up again, I went into applied research and innovation. So the time frame of innovation and development R&D became something that is what might be due within the next 5 years. And with my experience from the everyday operations as an architect or a structural engineer, I was then more prepared to look into that time frame and the time span, that what is it actually that we should be developing with the industry to make something tangible that then delivers the positive business impact overall to the industry. And then a couple of years before I moved to United States, I became a project lead and program lead for European Union funded smart city projects. And those who are joining in from Europe, I'm sure that you've heard about the Horizon 2020 program that has a lot of different streams and verticals. But what is the crimson thread there is that Europe is really engaged into a digital transformation of cities and governments, and really looking into how to revamp the existing infrastructure and the built environment to be more sustainable and impacting people's lives in the most positive way. And 5 years ago, when I moved to United States, I joined the dark side of the industry, general contracting, to really understand what are the issues and the problems in that scope of work in the technical life cycle for building, and really deep dive into how might we as a general contractor influence and support the design and engineering teams to develop and deliver the data that is important and critical for implementing the construction projects, and what are the opportunities for innovation in terms of how we build the buildings and the infrastructure. And that started cooking up already the idea of new type of business model. And when I joined Microsoft a little less than 2 years ago, that's when it all started to come together, that now that I sit in a real estate owner operations and owner organization, it all came together as the digital building lifecycle. So now we can start tying together the beginning and the end, that how do we as a real estate owner set the project teams on a path to success while supporting the digital transformation of the different stakeholder organizations, but at the same time enabling the accumulation of reliable and accurate data and help refine that into information that then, when we cluster those pieces of information, become intelligence for the different stakeholders. And that way we can start developing visual management tools and adapt to more integrated platforms and common data environments, and start to see that how might we actually democratize the data that is created by different stakeholders in a way that it's consumable for multitudes of different people, and we don't have to recreate the same data over and over again, but we can recycle the data and just continue combining it with different sets of data to create that meaningful information and intelligence for whatever decisions are being made. And now that is basically the overall career track that I've developed over the past 20 years. And to kind of get to the point of why hackathon, AEC Hackathon is so important, is that here's an illustration that I pulled from the internet, looking for something that I was originally trained to do, that architects, we learn how to draw by a hand, and that way we are capable of visualizing what we are actually thinking and conceptualizing the design ideas. But when we think about all the different stakeholders that are involved with the construction project, when we think about building information modeling or models or information management, using 2D drawings doesn't really provide us much information that we could then pull into a reliable coordination of designs or clash detection, scheduling, cost engineering, cost management, sustainability and lifecycle assessments, or facility management, or nowadays digital twins are becoming the hot topic in the industry, and it's seen as a major emerging technology that different industry verticals, not only the AECO industry, are looking into as the platform for digital transformation. So originally, when architects were designing buildings, they would create these axonometric and perspective images that are beautiful renderings of what the design intent is, but it doesn't really reflect what is actually being implemented, and it doesn't really support data transfer between human beings, or if we think about industrialized construction and pre-manufacturing, prefabrication, and pre-assemblies, these are not something that robotics and machines can really read and extract the data from. So overall, if we think about the analogy of moving from this type of design into CAD, what significant transformation has 2D CAD actually provided for the industry? We can create these basically simplifications about the design intent in 2D drawings, but it's very limited. And again, there's a lot of room for human error. And overall, there continues to be the confusion of what is the design intent versus what is actually being built, and how do we actually manage the accuracy of the data and all the different versioning of data if when we are producing the 2D drawings and publishing them somewhere, that there are already so many different changes happening in the physical environment that the documentation is already outdated. So overall, that's the reason why now it's very important that people who are driving the digital transformation of the AECO industry forward, that they are adapting to democratizing the data and integrating different digital platforms so that we can have that fluent exchange of data and information between different stakeholders, and that way make sure that we are no longer working in silos, just focusing on delivering a documentation that is not reflecting what is the actual physical environment, but we are really looking into how might we actually design and engineer the overall technical life cycle of the building, and tying that into how do we engineer the technical total performance of the building or the built environment and the social performance of the same environment in a way that it makes sense for the total cost of ownership. Because when we are thinking about the real estate owners that are investing into these projects, and they are either supporting the use of technology or not supporting it, we as designers and engineers, builders, technology developers, we can create that clarity that it actually has a very positive impact into the investment strategy of the real estate owner if we start to integrate more and innovate more in technology. And it opens up completely new different streams of how do we actually build the environment? How do we actually tie our sustainability strategies and design strategies into the early phases of the technical lifecycle of the building or the digital building lifecycle, and that way drive the positive outcomes that are not only supporting our own internal teams as a bubble, as a siloed bubble, but also those who are coming after us. And how can we actually pull from those who are working on the project in the next phase after us to guide us along so that we know exactly what is the most critical data for them as decision makers and as stakeholders to be successful at what they are doing. And I do understand that it's the development overall, it takes years, and innovation is fairly quick in terms of like thinking about next 2 to 5 years, and transformation takes longer. But as long as we as industry stakeholders do nothing, nothing is being transformed, nothing is improved, and we will remain at the traditional phase where people say that we have very slim profit margins, we can't take on risk, and we are dealing with very tedious processes. So if we continue to deliver the same traditional outcomes with the same traditional processes, we can never expect change to happen. So then that brings me to the question that, what about the I in the ND BIM, so multidimensional BIM, and why should we care about it in terms of digital twins? And since my BIM journey started already 20 years ago, and I do know that BIM has existed ever since late 1960s, and there is a lot of variance in which regions globally have already adapted to BIM-based design and delivery. The traditional approach and the lens on BIM has been, how can we deliver 2D drawings faster than we did yesterday or in our previous projects? Or how can we create those beautiful renderings and create something that is like a photorealistic view of about the design intent for the real estate investor to invest in? But now that we are really carefully looking into what is the framework of digital twins, what is the definition of digital twins, we have to start focusing more on the information in the building information models, and not only on the 3D geometry, which itself is basically the digital twin of the massing and the geometry of the physical artifact. But what we should be caring about is the information that then derives what is the schedule for implementing the project when the general contractor company or a fabricator is building that for us. What is the information that we need for simulating and analyzing the technical performance of the building, so that when it's being operated, we have a benchmark for seeing how much energy is this building supposed to be using compared to how much energy are the end users actually using, or how much energy is the building itself using, and how might we actually balance that out? How might we actually how might we balance and optimize the technical performance of the built environment, so that if we are thinking about the proactive maintenance of buildings and predictive operations, we're no longer using the terminology defined in the 1990s, because we are not in reactive mode anymore. We have so much data available that we don't have to think about predictive operations or predictive maintenance and then thinking about operations that might be, we don't have to forecast. We don't have to guess what is the performance going to be, because we have all the data already from the design and engineering phase, and we know exactly what supplier products went into the physical environment, where they went, what is their geolocation, and then start combining weather data and all kinds of different open data sources into a federated entity that then delivers us the digital twin. And that way, digital twin doesn't have to be as confined framework or entity as building information models are. BIM is already an ISO standard, and we know exactly how to create a building information model, and we know roughly what information needs to be embedded into it depending on what type of project we are doing. But now that digital twins are emerging, we can start expanding the scope of what data do we have. Is it structured data? Is it unstructured data? And really start to approach things from the visual management point of view. And that way, it's creating us a completely new type of environment to innovate on and see what might we do with the data if we want to consume it with augmented reality or mixed reality or virtual reality. And what is the next generation of development that happens in the digital construction or the digital building lifecycle framework, and how might we start moving towards simulated reality as the future North Star. So focusing more on the information part and really defining that what is the data that we need as stakeholders, and what is the information that we produce as stakeholders for the next stakeholders down the line. That is the key in BIM and digital twin framework these days, and that enables us to start innovating even more and more from digital platforms and adoption to a cloud as the infrastructure, or cloud as the service, or cloud as a platform, and seeing what we might be able to do if we had access to relevant data. And that kind of creates us the framework of what do we have to do as the digital leap in the AECO industry. I don't think that there are any stakeholders and real estate owners or architects, designers, engineers who are in BIM level 1. I think that pretty much everyone has already moved on from merely using 2D drawings and CAD and producing paper documents. But there's a lot of stakeholders that are still kind of too comfortable in BIM level 2 and creating the 3D models and creating the 3D geometry, but still dumbing it down into 2D documents and exchanging files and emails instead of exchanging data and information. And nowadays, since the digital twin technology is emerging and developing at a fast pace, we could do this digital leap and go from whatever BIM level we are in into the BIM level 4 and start to figure out what might we do if we created more cross-functional project teams and started lending the knowledge that different stakeholders have and pushing the data into a platform where all the stakeholders that need to access the data have access to it, and those who don't, they don't have to, and we avoid having the data tsunami that a lot of people were talking about a few years ago, and how they were building up this technology fatigue, that it was just unconsumable to deal with the amount of data that was being shoved to us as stakeholders, but really start embracing the transactable and interoperable data or transoperable data that is hosted in cloud environments, and then you can integrate whatever solution you need to integrate to access the data in a way that is no longer just interoperability and interaction on the API level, but it could be on cloud level, and that way we could tag in and plug in the entire supply chain, not only have the architects and engineer connect with the product manufacturers and ask them for data, but really build the overall project team into the same common data environment and have more clarity on who is the owner of the data and who is the author of the data. And that way it becomes a much better working ecosystem where nobody is left in a silo, nobody's left behind overall, and there's less confusion, there's less need for change orders, there's less need for requests for information, because people can be more independent in finding the solutions and finding the answers that they might have questions for. And it starts to build more trust among the project teams as well, that if you have access to data that is relevant for you, if there's anything that is wrong with the data, then you can address it and go back to the source that you've identified something that is impacting the overall health of the project. And that way, BIM level 4 is now becoming the new benchmark for what we should be using as the foundation for developing the BIM level 5 or BIM level 6 and going forward with the Industry 4.0. To kind of address the digital building lifecycle as the new business model, here is the simplified illustration of it. And the idea here is that the real estate owners are made more reliable or responsible and accountable for setting the stage for the overall AEC team, and for them to really develop their investment strategy and the digital building life cycle strategy and the design strategies at the early phases of the project. And that way, when the architects and engineers start their process, they already have access to the initial data, and they have clarity on what is it that the real estate owner is really looking for. And that way, when they are delivering their projects with BIM or digital twins, we can constantly check, is the design intent actually meeting the performance requirements and the total cost of ownership. And that way, when things are moving from design process into a pre-construction and construction process, we're no longer just thinking about construction documentation, but we can start comparing how much should we or might we produce in factory conditions, how might we embrace industrial construction, fabrication, pre-manufacturing, pre-assembly, and that way manage the amount of waste, manage the overall sustainability of the project, manage the sustainability of the entire life cycle, and really tap into the data and information that has already been created when nothing has yet been physically created, and simulate and analyze everything before we actually make the final decisions. And that way we can bring into the same process and into the same project team all the different manufacturers, suppliers, and tap into their expertise of how the different products are developed and manufactured to perform. And that way we can have the theoretical performance defined by the architects and engineers combined with the actual performance defined by the manufacturers and suppliers. So when we are moving on to phase 9 and we have the handover of the physical artifact, we have all the foundational data and information required to build up the digital twin. And then it's up to the real estate owner and the end users of the built environment to really define that what are the different components of the digital twin that they want to federate and integrate together. And that way the digital twin, it's more of a more flexible framework than the very defined and well optimized building information model framework, and it can continue to grow. So when we are making changes into our physical environment, we can collect the evidence from the total performance of the physical environment or the natural environment and consolidate that with the data-based or data created by the architects and engineers and see what are the optimal sequences of tenant improvements, retrofits, or renovations. And that way, the operations of facilities and the facility management is no longer time-based, but is condition-based. And we have more holistic view into why our buildings or the infrastructure is performing in the way that it is, and what is the optimized update or upgrade or change that we should do in our physical environment to optimize the performance overall. And that way, hopefully, extend the technical life cycle of the infrastructure and really prepare for the end of the physical life cycle in a way that we are upscaling or upcycling and recycling and reusing the components that have already been developed and manufactured into something that they might have a completely new type of technical life cycle going forward, and that way we can optimize how much waste are we actually producing when we are making the changes, and that way whenever there's a new technical life cycle being started, we are always benchmarking with how we actually delivered the previous life cycle and continue ramping up the ambition, so that when we are thinking about, for example, sustainability, we can start approaching the reversed sustainability, which means that when we are making changes into our natural environment or the built environment, we're actually improving it. And that we're reversing the damage that has been done by the humankind over the past centuries. And that way, it's again, a new platform for a new type of innovation in how we design and engineer our environment. How do we actually build it? And that way it becomes a flywheel for improving our environments as we are improving the innovation processes. And the digital building lifecycle, it continues on longer than the technical lifecycle that has originally been the framework for designing and engineering our environments. Here's an illustration of what might be the final outcomes of using data as a visual management tools. So now that we are hacking into the different data platforms and technical platforms, how might we make data and information more consumable for different stakeholders and create these at-glance experiences of data in a way that the decision makers can arrive at confident decisions at faster and shorter period of time, and make the data and information more consumable for people who have very different lens of view into the same project. And that way, instead of going through pages of written documentation or listening to long presentations and still being unsure what is the decision that is the optimal decision, we could look into how might we create these visual management platforms, how might we create visual data, how might we actually refine data into information that then becomes intelligence and creates us a more holistic view about the total performance of our environments, and what is the implication for the total cost of ownership. And that way, hopefully, the profitability and productivity of our projects in the AEC industry will start to go up. And that way we can kind of yank this AEC industry from the bottom of the digital transformation and technical capability, hopefully to the top of any industry. So we have this opportunity now. Technology is no longer the inhibitor. It's more about the mindset and how do we as an industry start to collaborate more closely with each other, and expanding the AEC industry to collaborate more with technology industry and manufacturing industry as well. So that was my presentation for you all hackers. I hope you have the most fantastic time hacking your projects, and I really look forward to learning what you've done and what you see as the future of the AEC industry. Thank you so much for having me as your speaker. Thank you, Craig.
Hey, thank you, Salla. You covered a lot of territory in a presentation, which is great, but you've also done that in your professional career. I'm going to open it up to questions. Do you have time for a few questions, Salla?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. And I have one myself as they come in. The building industry could learn from so many other industries, manufacturing, aerospace, automotive, and now you're co-chair of the Digital Twin Consortium. So I don't know how you find time to do that also, but that's going to involve multiple industries exploring and building out digital twin processes and pipelines. But it still brings back the challenge, how do we get the technology industry and building industry to work together as collaborators and partners? That's kind of been a long-term dream, and I think AEC hackers are opting into innovation. so we can bring people who want to do it, because I think they're the ones we need on the front lines to do that. But there are cultural differences between tech and AEC. What are your thoughts on how do you bridge that gap or find those people?
Very good question. I think that overall, think about the AEC industry versus technology industry. The development cycles are at a very different rhythm. The AEC industry is always decades of the same project kind of going on, and the stakeholders change depending on which phase you are working on. And it's very hard for a technology company that kind of develops new solutions every 2 weeks, or there's a faster rhythm to arrive at solutions, to work with an industry that requires years to kind of adapt to something that is a new tool or a new process. From technology development point of view, the AEC industry needs to pick up its pace and start a faster digital transformation to make it more feasible for technology companies to actually develop solutions. And then maybe there's more room for niche technology developers to integrate more with more generic technology developers and look into integration more than a very niche development of tools that people have to then buy a license for and make the installations, because then you end up with a technology stack that is hundreds of different softwares that you have to remember your login name to, or install the software and update the software on your computers or tablets, etc. But really, how might we find a rhythm that is comfortable for the technology companies that are very fast-paced, with the AECO industry stakeholders that deal with very long project lead times, and it's very hard to get on those projects that are already contracted and already have the project teams hurrying up to finish what they've started. So maybe there is an opportunity for having more dialogue and more engagement, more interaction and collaboration together, and breaking down the silos that traditionally exist. And that way, look what we might do together.
Thank you. Well, you're certainly in a good position to help make that happen. I do have a question coming in. What are the most innovative projects using digital twins for designing smart, sustainable cities?
There are a lot of good examples from the world, a global AECO industry, but overall, digital twins is now an emerging technology. So there is still a lot of work to be done in defining what digital twins are, as the definition of smart places also evolves. So smart places are smart buildings, smart infrastructure, smart campuses, smart cities. So merging those two together is what the Digital Twin Consortium is really focusing on this year. A good example of a project, I'd say that Microsoft headquarters refresh project is one to look into and search more about. It's a very, very cool project, and I encourage people to check out what we've been doing there. And I published a couple of LinkedIn articles in the past month to shine a little bit of light on that project.
Yeah, thanks. And I think just one of the things AEC Hackathon, the advantage we have is we have people from, let's call them CAD companies like Autodesk, but also have presenters from Epic and Unreal. Epic, Unreal, and Unity, essentially they're building their own digital twins or people using their technologies, and how will that merge with CAD, BIM, fabrication data? And I think we've seen some hacks moving in that direction. Really exciting.
Good.
Let me check the other questions coming in. Anyone else? Please add in your questions in the Q&A.
I had a question I dropped in the panelist chat.
Okay.
I guess I can just ask it here.
Why don't you just ask it here?
Yeah, if we want to combine different Microsoft services into our AEC related solutions, so we want to, leverage Azure Maps, the HoloLens stuff. I mean, all the great different ingredients that you have. Is there any chance that there's like one MS portal that's kind of all things that would be related to this type of digital twin and complementary services, or do we have to go out to the individual sections of all of those and piece them together on our own?
Good question. I think that everyone online have heard about GitHub. So that's where there are a lot of cool packages already published to support development of applications on top of Azure or our mixed reality solutions, etc. So I would definitely go and look at what has already been published for the benefit of outside of Microsoft developers. And then if you have a company that is building their solutions on Microsoft technology stack, you can reach out to me and I'll make further introductions to product development teams and that way provide my support.
Beautiful. Thank you, Salla. Again, I don't know how you have time. You're taking on so much, but we're really happy to have you participate and also be a leader in actually implementing some of this change. So hopefully you'll still find time to participate in more of our events coming up. And I know I'll be asking you, certainly.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Damon. Thank you, everyone online. I hope you enjoy this summer's hackathon. I really look forward to seeing what kind of solutions you've created and learning from them.
Beautiful. Thank you, Salla. I think we'll close now up the session. Thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you at the next session. It begins at 6 o'clock Eastern time, and we've got Clifton Harness, CEO and founder of TestFit, speaking about some of the generative design tools, very compelling. I also want to say you may still register for the event at hackaec.com, and do sign up in our Slack community, aec-hackathon.slack.com. And finally, I want to say, do show us some love and do some tweet about the event using the hashtag AECH Online. And thank you, and look forward to the next session. And thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.